Joining me to help break it all down, CNBC contributor Ron Insana. Brendan Buck is a former aide to Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan and an MSNBC political analyst. With me here in studio is NBC's Christine Romans and Adrienne Elrod, former senior advisor and senior spokesperson for the Harris-Walz campaign. Welcome, everybody. Christine, unpack this report for us because I think it surprised a lot of people. What does it signal about the economy?
It signals that the U.S. labor market, the job market, is resilient and it's strong. And so we're beginning this period of tariff and trade war uncertainty from a good position. And I think that that's really important to note. You've got an unemployment rate of 4.2%. That's still historically low. You see those 9,000 federal jobs lost, about 26,000 so far this year. There'll be more. The government, even in this report, Chris, pointing out that if you are a government worker who accepted a buyout and you're still being paid, you're not counted in these numbers yet. You're still seen as employed. So there'll be more of those numbers. But overall, when you talk to small businesses and mid-sized businesses, there's been so much of a shutdown of buying and hiring. And more recently, we'll see if that filters into months ahead. But for now, steady as she goes in the job market.
All right, Ron, we heard just yesterday from the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce that small businesses are waiting for certainty. Big companies are pulling guidance because they don't know what's coming. So how does that square with what you're seeing in these jobs numbers?
Well, I think it's early, Chris, in the sense that, even through April, when the tariffs were just announced, the reciprocal tariffs on April 2nd, the data for this report gathered around April 12th in that week. And so, there's a bit of a lag time between the time in which the tariffs were announced, rolled back, at least in part, and then some added on for the economy to feel that shock. I mean, we effectively have, at this point, and this is something that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent admitted to, a trade embargo with China, even though over the weekend, or just last night, I should say, they opened the door to talks. There's a long lag time. The last ships that are coming from China to the United States with goods that don't have tariffs associated with them are just hitting our shores. So in 6 to 8 weeks is really when we could start feeling this, barring any, improvement in negotiations between these countries and others. So it's early to use these data to suggest that the tariffs have in any way slowed labor market growth, have pushed up inflation, are pushing us near recession. Those concerns, even with the GDP report we saw yesterday, are still weeks to months away.
So it shouldn't have any significant impact on economists' perception of the kind of impact tariffs could have down the road. Again, as you say, unless there's a bunch of deals that get made very fast.
Right, and deals that are meaningful. It's not just, okay, we're gonna stop selling fentanyl ingredients. Well, that's important, and certainly from a health perspective, dampens the impact of this crisis that we've been having when it comes to material goods that go on retailer shelves and so on and so forth. Unless or until we know that we have a concrete deal that kind of removes these barriers in both directions, there's still a great deal of uncertainty that's going to constrain both consumer and business behavior for some time to come.
I haven't seen, Brendan, anything on Truth Social yet. I wonder if we're going to see the president taking credit for this in the economy right after claiming it's actually Joe Biden's economy.
Yeah, well, the White House already put out paper declaring a jobs boom today. So, yeah, of course, when the GDP numbers go down, it's Joe Biden's economy. When jobs numbers look good, it's Trump's economy. Look, I think this shows two things. One, as we discussed, Donald Trump inherited an economy that was ready to take off. He didn't have to do a whole lot to have a really solid economic legacy, but he's completely botched it through this trade policy. But I love it when they embrace, a good jobs number like today, because I do think the president is going to own whatever happens here, for better or worse. And there will be no being able to blame Joe Biden if store shelves are empty. There will be no pandemic to blame. This is Donald Trump economics unfiltered. He set himself up with an administration where no one is restraining him. There are no guardrails. We're going full Trump. And we're going to see what the consequences of that are. And I don't think they're going to be good. And I hope that we learn a lesson that this kind of populist economics gets you nowhere really fast.
And I think, Adrienne, we'll hear Democrats argue this doesn't change the bottom line. For them, the bottom line was what Elon Musk started with. I'm going to save $2 trillion, then $1 trillion. And, they kept cutting how much. Listen to what some of the people at that town hall said last night about money being saved with these DOGE cuts.
They didn't save any money by firing us. Most of FDA, especially where we were in Cedar, we were paid for by user fees. The pharmaceutical industry pays for us. So you didn't save a dollar.
This president who said he was going to cut costs has actually increased federal spending more than any other president. He is the biggest spender in his first 100 days.
So one of the things that Booker said that struck me was, this isn't politics, this is math. And we've seen some great reporting, including in the New York Times, of them going line by line over the things that DOGE posted, not true, claiming, things that actually didn't happen. Are Democrats, though, doing enough to coalesce around a really solid, strong message?
Yeah, I mean, look, Chris, it's a couple of things here. I mean, number one, we do know that a lot of Americans, especially for Trump coming into the administration, wanted to see waste, fraud, and abuse cut from government. They wanted to see a more streamlined, less bureaucratic process. So at first, when Elon was doing some of these, DOGE cuts, it was kind of popular. Very quickly, though, that changed when you started seeing local post offices being shut down, when you started seeing people not being able to get anybody when they call the Social Security office to check on their checks. When you're looking at people in your communities and you're realizing, wait, my neighbor just got laid off, and they were doing really incredible work. When you actually start to peel back the curtain and look at the fact that so many people who have lost their jobs were doing mission critical work. And of course, also, Chris, like something I feel like we don't talk enough about as Democrats, a lot of people, that this was already, the people had jobs that were already that were paid for by appropriated funds, which meant the money was already out the door. They had the jobs with money that was already appropriated. So to just go in and hastily cut these jobs and to create this wishy-washy environment where, people were laid off, then a week later they got, called back, and then 2 days later they said, oh, never mind, we're actually eliminating your job. That instability and that chaos that Trump and his emissaries like Elon have created here only causes more confusion and chaos. And along the way, Americans are suffering from it.
Yeah, and that whole thing of you're fired, you're not, come back, go away, was talked about at the town hall last night. Let me play some of that.
It's all kind of dizzying, too. So many of these people. How many of you have been fired, reinstated, and fired again, or some version of that? Yeah. There you go. One more time for everybody. Hands up high, please. Fired, reinstated, and then fired again. It's all very dizzying. How do you understand sort of the disorder of this process?
You can't understand, because every day you're wondering, is today the day I lose my job? Is today the day I get my job back? Do I have insurance each day? That's a whole nother issue that we're running into now. So you can't.
I wonder, Brendan, I mean, look, a lot has been talked about in terms of the chaos, and even defenders of Donald Trump will acknowledge, many of them, that there is chaos, but they say that it is, the ends justify the means, essentially, the whole question of savings. But when you start to talk about things like people wondering if they have their health care, when you start to feel the humanity of each individual and what they've been through, saying, yeah, you've got your job, no, you don't, yeah, you got your job, where does basic human morality come into this? Or does it, in a political sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's why this was so out of balance. A lot of human pain for very little taxpayer gain in the long run. The hectic nature of it, I think, was the real downfall of the DOGE effort. There is real, fat in the federal government that can be rooted out, for sure. It didn't have to be done in the first 10 days or whatever it's been in some of these places. If they wanted to go about this in a serious way, there could have been a real good, successful story here where you take a look at each program by program. Where do we have too much? Where is too little? Let's make actual targeted, sophisticated thinking cuts here rather than what they did here. I think they have spoiled what could have been successful and had not really saved a lot of money. Look, the administration just sent up to Congress what we call a rescissions package. That means we've looked at the numbers, and here's how much we think that we can undo in spending that you sent. It's sort of a fast-track bill. You can just pass it right through the Senate with 50 votes. They came up with $9 billion. That is absolutely nothing. Elon Musk was talking about trillions of dollars that they were going to be able to cut. It's just because they haven't taken the time to really look under the hood, see how this works, see where there actually is overstaffing or overlap in what we're doing. So, yeah, you've got a lot of people whose lives have been turned upside down, and taxpayers aren't really all that much better off.
So, Ron, the Wall Street Journal also has exclusive reporting today that new federal standards and a surge in applications have slowed down hospital payments that are supposed to supplement Medicaid. And the net effect is that That's left some hospitals without the funds they need to operate. Many of them rural hospitals. May I remind folks, not that I have to remind this panel, a lot of those rural voters voted for Donald Trump. Are we just starting to see that kind of impact of these cuts on the government's ability to provide basic functions, not even to mention life-saving functions?
Yeah, 100%. And what's really interesting and ironic about that is, on the one hand, they're cutting areas where the U.S. typically excels, and they're cutting areas, as you mentioned, that service the poorest of the poor, people in rural areas who don't have access, more broadly speaking, to quality health care. On top of that, the president, according to my colleague Megan Casella today, submitted a budget blueprint to Congress, a wish list, if you will. The president doesn't get to appropriate funds, but he did so by adding $150 billion in defense spending that would take the defense budget to $1 trillion for the first time ever. Even if the DOGE cuts at $165 billion were right, the additional tax cuts also being proposed in the budget would add anywhere from $5 to $11 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years, depending on how that is scored in Congress. So there is no real effort to cut spending. And you certainly see that in bond market interest rates. You see it in the value of the dollar. Stock markets recovered a lot because China opened the door to talks and the economic numbers have been decent. But this notion that so much money is being cut from the federal government is, on the one hand, fallacious, and on the other hand, they're cutting things that are actually direct benefits to Americans, particularly those who need the benefits most.